Hello and welcome to one of my streams. Today, what I want to do is paint a mountain scene. So basically, we're going to have a nice sky here, cloud in front, a very distant ridge line, and then we're kind of gonna mix in areas of light and dark to give this main body of the painting some texture. And then in the foreground here, we're going to have a ridge with some different shapes of light on it. Um, on the right above me here, I do have some inspiration that I'm looking at to kind of glance at. But basically, we're gonna have a ridge flowing like this in front as our foreground, and then a couple, two different areas here and here that are a little more distant. The first thing that I'm going to do is begin to paint in some underpainting with some burnt sienna. I'll put that on my palette now with a decent amount of paint. And the first thing I'm going to do is begin to mix in water with, oh shit, and I dropped my paint. Sorry for that. And I'm going to mix in water with my paint here until it gets to be kind of creamy. I'm going to do it a little bit slow and just kind of pull this out on my palette. Just mixing in water until it gets to be the consistency that I want. Pulling it out nice and flat. Wiping off a paper towel. Adding in a little more water. I think that is good. And with a very large brush, what I'm going to begin doing is just painting in understrokes. I have quite a lot of paint on the brush here, so I'm going to start, I think, lower on the canvas. And I'm just going to kind of try to paint this in. And here, I'm going to try to be a little bit mindful of the direction that I want the brush to go in. I kind of want to try to follow this ridge line a little bit. And then here, probably something like this. Working back over that to kind of get that going back in the right direction. And basically what I'm doing is I'm using the textures of the brush strokes to kind of decide where we want our mountains to be, how I want them to flow. And I'm kind of just trying to follow in this ridge line here a little bit, just loosely following the sketch. Doesn't have to be exact or perfect. And by doing it in this way, I'm also kind of changing the values of the painting as well. So basically, because I had more paint on the brush at first, I created a much lighter shade. And as I'm going through here, I'm kind of creating these different shapes and shadings of value as I go through and paint this more distant ridgeline. And now, as I paint in the sky, I kind of want to make sure that I'm being very light and flat with my strokes and really kind of long, and letting them kind of become this kind of flat surface. And again, kind of coming in here, doing the same. And then with the clouds, I kind of want to have a slight difference in my brush strokes. Back to some more sky there. As I kind of try to fluff them and pull them up. I may need to add some more paint to the brush before I do that. Get rid of some excess paint. Cool. Now I have some paint there, so I'm going to try to apply that to the clouds, like so, and use that part of my brush to kind of fluff the clouds in a more upward direction, like that. And kind of cleaning up as I go along. I do have to work fairly fast in acrylics because it's just going to dry quite fast. But I kind of want to have that more upward fluffy direction to my clouds. Maybe I'll kind of work them down a little bit with the corner of the brush. I am basically just using a very large flat brush for this layer. As this layer dries in, I will switch probably to a smaller brush as I also change colors. This is also probably just the first coat of this. I'm probably going to layer on another coat. Again, as it kind of dries. That's why I'm also working in different parts of the painting at different points in time because that'll let us have some drying time between each of the various different layers. So even now, I can kind of see that the layer at the bottom here is beginning to dry. So I'm going to clean my brush off. Sorry. Going to add some more of our watery mixture to my brush. Again, kind of back in like that. And I'm going to start, I think, here this time. Again, I just kind of want to try to make some different shapes and to give the impression that there are some different ridges here that are making up our distant background. Just adding some texture and character to this area that'll be the largest part of the painting. I am kind of glancing at my inspiration, but if I'm honest, this part of the inspiration is also kind of flat and without texture, and I kind of want to give it a little more, a little more to look at as we go through. Again, some more paint on the brush like that, so I'm going to come in with a flat of it, just apply that paint like that, and then kind of work it down. And then back into this area to make this a little bit darker now. So again, I'm not really adding any other colors to this mixture. I'm not adding in any white. I'm not adding in anything to lighten or darken the paint. I'm just trying to use the one color and the amount of medium that I use to change the value of the painting. I'm washing my brush again. I'm gonna take some more paint. Kind of load it up like that on the brush, and I'm right back in. Again, just trying to add some variation here. I also don't want it to be quite so obvious as it is now. I want it to kind of have a softness to it. So you can see texture, but you can't really tell what the texture is. And that'll be much more aligned with our inspiration. In this picture as well, the sun's coming in from a left-hand direction. So I want to be mindful that most of the darker shades are on this side. And as of right now, I'm kind of the opposite of that. So I do want to kind of try to soften this up some and try to make sure that I'm reflecting where the light is and being mindful of that as I go along. Again, just little soft bits of texture to try to add some indication of some stuff going on without giving the eye anything specific to look at. Just something to think about. We want the eye to kind of linger and try to figure things out as someone's looking at the painting. And this kind of softness will create just little subtle variations, little subtle hints to look at, which is really something that I think acrylic paint is very, very good for. I'm going to go back into those clouds a little bit. A little more paint. Again, trying to get them nice and fluffy. As I glaze this and add layers on, these will become a little more striking as clouds. But for now, what I really want to do is just kind of make sure that that they are standing out something that's darker than the overall background sky. Washing my brush again. Mic audio, yep, cool, checking. I always get paranoid that my mic's not working, and I'm just sitting here talking to myself, but clearly it is. So that is fine. Cool. Loading on some more paint. Just like that. And again, back into our clouds, kind of make sure I'm being a little bit gentle here. I just want to take some, let's try to have some like more circular motions here to really try to get the fluffiness of the clouds out. If I fluff them in this direction instead. And really what I'm trying to do with these smaller paintings, just kind of learn. And really experiment and really feel free to kind of play with different things of how I might make different shapes and forms and how I might, communicate certain parts of a painting without having to worry about screwing up some larger painting or screwing up something that I worked on for days. Really trying to help myself eliminate fear and apprehension with painting. Um, I started out using mostly digital art. Oops, I just messed up. So what I forgot to do there was add paint to the brush. And when I went in with a straight damp brush, what the brush did was remove the paint. So that's obviously not something that we want. So I'm going to go back in with some more paint and just try to lightly add in what I removed there. And again, going kind of across to get our sky back in place. And then let's try to fluff these a little more around the edges here. So these clouds are basically off to the north. And I do kind of want to make sure that we have different little spots of texture in there and kind of really have the ability to make them look nice and fluffy. As I add more paint too, these lines will kind of fade back. So our actual sketch will go away or drift further back and be covered up. One point that I'm still a little bit fearful and I don't quite do very well is that I don't sketch with paint. I still sketch with pencil, which is a little bit of something I think might be holding me back just a little bit as I paint in, because instead of trying to just paint freely, I'm trying to follow the lines. And I think that is also something that I don't really think is necessarily, so a little bit of paint on the brush. I wasn't sure of myself there, and I thought I had not added any on. I'm washing it off again. Cool. And I'm just using my finger to kind of straighten the brush out, get rid of some of the messiness of it. And I'm just pulling myself back through my palette a bit, get some more paint on it, get the bristles a little more clean, and then we're right back in with a little bit of paint and kind of trying to follow along this edge here. Just adding in some different kinds of value like that. Just different spots where we might have light or dark. Again, I do want to try to add more paint to the right-hand side of the painting here, just to make sure that I am capturing that it is a bit darker on that side. So I do want to make sure, that's a giant glob of paint. Let's get rid of that. And kind of make sure that we're being neat with the brush. Just adding in some more paint to this side to give it a little bit of a darker hue. Again, trying to draw this along in different shapes and patterns and letting the brush leave a little more paint in certain spots. I'm not trying to put an even coat on. I'm not painting a house. I'm trying to make sure that I am letting the paint do its thing. Cool. Right back in. And here, let's do some more stuff down here. Cool. And maybe we'll see, now that I have more paint there, that's kind of forcing my this is kind of forcing this almost closer than this. I do want to kind of reinforce this a bit and add some more paint to this section. And the reason I have this line here is because this little section here is very bright. and the sun's kind of catching that a bit brighter than the other pieces. So I kind of make sure that I'm capturing that. And we have this kind of darker V in the reference image here. So I do want to try to make sure that I'm kind of capturing this kind of like V shape that is in that painting of some darker shapes and forms. Rinsing off my brush again. Just a little bit of paint, and I'm just going to try to, well, I think that's too wet still. So what I'm going to do is actually add some more paint to my palette. Same color, burnt sienna. I really like to use burnt sienna for my underpaintings because it really is a nice, rich color. And I think it kind of does a really good job of does a really good job of balancing out blues and greens that can add it to a landscape and really complementing them well. Again, adding in water and kind of flattening it out. The paint that is, kind of spreading it around on my canvas until it's kind of very light and creamy. Probably need a little more paint than that because I think I added a bit too much water. Basically what I'm seeing on my palette is little bubbles. And as I'm seeing those, I think that's something that's a bit too wet. A bit too much medium. Again, in acrylics, water is both your medium and it is your solvent. So it'll both wash away and help prevent the paint from drying so fast. So I think I have a good consistency there. So I'm just going to make sure I'm adding the paint that I've globbed onto the brush as part of the mixing process back onto the canvas. I'm going to wash the brush off again. And then I'm going to clean it again. Right next to me, I have just to have a ton of paper towels, which is kind of letting me clean these brushes off very efficiently. And now I'm going to take my newly mixed paint onto my brush like that, and I'm just going to try to create some shapes and forms in the foreground here. And really let my brush kind of define a nice gradient between the two. And as I paint more, I'm going back to the area that I think should be lighter. That way it'll still be a little bit darker than the image behind it. So like it's still going to stand out a little bit from here, but now it's also got this darker form in front of it. And this kind of shape kind of runs all along here. So I'm trying to kind of let it kind of drift down further into the canvas and blend gradually out, so that you also have a lighter area here, which is higher on that ridge, letting it kind of catch out. And I kind of want to do something similar for this shape here. Pulling some more paint onto my palette knife onto my brush. It's funny, I always call my palette knife my brush, and I always call my brush my palette knife. So I forget what I'm doing. Now that I've applied some paint here, what I'm going to do is come back here with my left hand, because it's a bit easier that way. Just kind of applying some shapes here like that as well. Okay, now that we have that, I'm going to wash my brush. Grab some more paint. I'm going to kind of work my ridge again. Oh, I got a lot of paint there. That's okay. I can always spread it out and let that kind of shape come in. And I kind of want to let the ridge have a little bit of form here. So I'm going to kind of try to make sure that I'm constantly shifting and changing the direction of my brush, which will help to give our ridge a little bit of form. And pulling down a little bit. Coming back in here and just letting this have shape and form to it. And now what I'm trying to do also is not follow the line so much because I want this to be a little bit softer. I want the paint to define it rather than the line that my eye can see. I have some paint on there still, so I'm going to try to apply that. My right hand is a bit more accurate. Right along there like that. And I'm just going to gently brush that down. Then change my direction and move just like that. Cool. Now washing my brush again, I'm going to take more paint. And I think what I want to do is come away from the foreground for a little bit. And I want to come back into this area here. Just add some subtle shapes in. And by now, a lot of this background area has dried. So I can begin to start to think about and work through some more paint on here and to create some of that variation of tone to give the impression that there's more stuff going on here than maybe our eye can clearly see. And basically I'm going to keep doing this to my underpainting until I have built up a couple different areas and until I begin to kind of think about where my spots of light and dark are in both the foreground and the background. And basically what I'm kind of seeing with my eye is, okay, cool, I have a lighter area here and a darker area here. And I'm basically trying to use the different shades of burnt sienna to delineate where my light spots are versus where my dark spots are. So my clouds in the sky are very light, barely touched, where my underground here, my midground and my foreground are much darker in value and have a much different tone. So basically, I'm imagining that this cloud is really sitting over this mountain range, and this cloud is the thing casting this shadow into this part of the painting. I'm also trying to kill some time here as I talk to let the paint dry. And so as I kind of point this stuff out, this acrylic is already beginning to dry and already beginning to kind of soften and get tacky. And as it is, that'll let me stack more paint on top of it to let it get even darker in value. Well, I think what I want to do next is take a little bit of paint. So I'm going to take it from a wetter area of my palette. I'm going to come back into my sky and I'm just going to try to soften this a little bit and add some paint to this area here. I'm kind of seeing a little bit too much of the canvas still. Cleaning my brush, dabbing it dry in my mountain of paper towels again, and back into my wetter area of paint. Just pulling up and across and trying to add some more paint to this section of the painting without really causing it to become darker. Notice I'm kind of pulling paint across onto the tape as well. By doing that, I'm kind of also making sure that I am not leaving my brushstroke on the canvas, making a flatter effect. What I don't really want on sky are these kind of like ridge patterns I have here where you can clearly see where the brush stopped a little bit. So those are okay for now because again, they're going to get painted over. I'm cleaning my brush again and I'm just going to keep working this through and keep focusing on having this come along very nicely. So again, my next step here, I think I'm going to now take some more wet paint again. When I say wet paint, basically what I'm meaning is I'm kind of looking at the palette and I'm seeing different areas that are dry versus wet. And I'm trying to pick from areas where there's more water than paint. Now I'm just going to kind of begin to fluff these through. Notice how these lines are moving. It's because they're dry. Um, and I probably should have worked them softer when they were still wet, but I didn't notice them until it was too late, which is fine. Because again, we're going to be adding in multiple layers here, but it might be hard for us to get rid of these different lines here. I'm not sure if you can even see them on camera, but there are basically 7 or 8 different distinct lines on there. And what I'm probably going to do later on as I paint is apply a sky color very flatly with a brush, and then I may apply the cloud layer with a palette knife. And that will give our clouds a lot of detail and texture beyond um, the background lighter sky. And that'll definitely let me override and put some more focus onto the sky, onto the clouds versus the very flat and bright sky. As I add in paint, I can probably also overwrite them a little bit. Again, trying to add in some just different softer strokes here. Letting our clouds be a little fluffy. Letting them have some kind of vague definition, not really letting them be too bright or too distinct. And just trying to kind of fluff them up a little bit and letting them be very flat along the bottom, like that. Washing my brush again. Pulling across. And again, trying to make things a little bit fluffy to have a little more definition. I'm also trying to let the clouds kind of be lighter on the left-hand side versus the right-hand side. And I want to try to make it look as if they are heavier toward this direction, maybe a little bit closer as well. As if they are moving in closer and approaching us from left to right. Okay. Back in, and again, fluffiness. Pulling flat along the bottom. Cool. Now that we have our clouds a little more defined, I can then begin to work into my foreground a little more, because by now my foreground is a bit more dry as well. And again, what I want, my goal for the foreground is to take thicker paint. So I'm going to pick from an area that has more paint than water. And I'm going to apply paint kind of liberally. And I'm going to focus on trying to be mindful of that darker area that we created before. As I do this, I'm going to clean off my brush quite constantly because I want to keep adding on more and more paint to this area. See, even this, I think what I'm doing now is it's even too wet. So I think what I need to do is actually add in some potentially very dry acrylic paint. And I think I'm going to add some more paint to my palette directly over what I've already mixed so that it's only a little bit wet. I think the other issue I might be having is my paper towels have become very damp. So when I dry my brush, I'm really not getting it very dry. I'm not quite getting it dry enough. And what I'm just going to do is take quite a lot of very heavy paint, and I'm really going to just stamp it in. And again, it's not quite giving me the impression that I want. That's okay though. I think I can still work with this and kind of use this as a way to delineate the two different areas. As I go in later on, I'll have to add in heavier paint here, because it's really not sticking the way that I want it to. Maybe what I'll do is I'll switch to a much drier brush. We'll switch over to a much smaller brush as well. Oops, sorry, you saw my head a bit there, too much. I'm trying to be mindful not to lean forward. I'm also trying to be mindful of where my hand is on the stick. I'm trying to make sure that's further back so that I can have brush strokes that are where I'm not trying to draw. A lot of times, I'm again as a digital artist, I'm much more used to I'm much more used to using a stylus, and that is a pen. Pens and brushes behave very differently, and I am trying to be mindful that I am, as I stroke through, you can kind of see it that my brush is behaving a little bit differently now, to where like it is actually beginning to um, pull pull a little bit and apply a little more paint just by changing the way that I'm using it. Whereas here, I'm kind of just using the tip of it, right? I'm almost like stamping at the canvas. Whereas here, the brush is is able to fan out more and actually behave like a brush. And since I am a beginner, my tendency is to kind of run home to mama, and it kind of is a tendency to use the technique that I am more familiar with, which is using it as a drawing implement. When I'm not drawing, I'm painting. I kind of have to be mindful of that as I kind of work on the canvas here. Cool. Um, Apologize if you're hearing some background noise. It is a snowy day, and my HOA is currently cleaning my walkway. So you may hear some shoveling in the background. What I did there was just clean the brush, add some more paint. I'm kind of trying to go back in. Again, work this area a little more. Um, I'll probably have to let it fully dry and add more paint to it. I think in the meantime, what I'm going to do is start to think about how I want the sky to look. I think what I'm going to do is mix and add in some grabbing my art bin a little bit. And what I'm going to do, I think, is grab some phthalo blue. And I think I want to have some raw umber ready. And I think I want to have some phthalo green ready. So both my phthalos, I think I might use my phthalo green as my black, and I'll use that to establish very deep shades of value. Sorry for the large sound of the buckle there. Now, very similar to the previous layer, I'm going to add some phthalo blue to my canvas. I'm going to put it right next to where I put the orange. I'm going to let them mix a little bit, and I'm going to add in water again. I'm just going to pull out from my blue until I have that very creamy consistency, and then wipe my brush on the canvas until I have it very, very clear. Now, in addition to that phthalo blue, I also want to have titanium white, because I don't want pure blue. Pure phthalo blue would be very dark. So right next to that, I've added in titanium white. And here's the specific phthalo blue that I'm using. Now, because I want this to be a little bit grayer, I'm also going to add in some burnt umber right next to that as well. And I'm going to let this form kind of a brownish gray color to form the basis of our sky. And again, I'm just going to clean my brush. I'm going to let it get damp. I'm going to kind of pull the white in first, then the brown. And what I'm trying to do is make a nice light sky blue on my palette. I don't want, I kind of want it to be like a soft grayish blue. And I want to make sure that I'm kind of making areas that are of different tone, different value. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that I have the ability to make brighter spots and darker spots. I am now cleaning my brush again, and I'm going to now take from a lighter area first. Really load paint on my brush. And now I'm just going to begin painting in crisscross strokes up here. Right on top of that layer of brown that we have. Being okay with me covering up the other color, that's okay. And we want it to show through a little bit, so we want to kind of spread this a bit thin. And almost pull it down. Move my hand a little bit further back on the brush as well. And really just spread the paint across the canvas. And really just let the paint kind of breathe a little bit and before I go back and add some more. And really letting it spread over our cloud area as well, because I want this to form a base for that area while still letting it be a little bit different. Now I'm going to go back into that my water bowl, clean my brush, dry it again, taking from a darker area now. Again, reloading, really getting a lot of paint on the brush, and kind of loading it up like that. And now I'm kind of going to start here and begin to pull this area down across, like so. And again, kind of spreading it up and out into our cloud area. And I'm going to even try to maybe pull it down a little bit into the lighter areas of our ridge. I really kind of want to begin to just add different parts of color to the painting as a whole. Cool. And come back up here a little bit and really just letting the paint get a little bit softer. Very good. Now, I'm now going to take some more of our raw umber, drag that in a little more, some more phthalo blue, mix that in, a touch of white. What I really want to try to create here is a little bit of a duller shade, more brown. Well, again, very loaded on the brush and very similar, right back in. As I now begin to kind of really layer this in, moving my hand back again. I kind of caught myself there, kind of caught myself drawing again and not painting. And I'm changing the direction of my brush strokes to indicate where I want the ridge to be. A very distant ridge that we had. Okay, cool. Now, I want to come back in and I want to take my much lighter shade again. And I want to pull from my titanium white into my damp area and create a much brighter shade. Again, a lot of paint on the brush here. And I'm just going to kind of take this line here and I'm going to move this up like this and begin to try to think about how the clouds will actually look. And begin to actually paint in our cloud shapes as well. Trying to be fluffy with my strokes, being very light. Moving my hand back a little bit and just trying to let the brush dance a little bit. Let the brush decide where it wants to put the shapes of the clouds. I'm trying to draw nice and flat along the bottom here, like that. And now do the same thing. I'm cleaning my brush off, and I am now going to go ahead and pull from some more white. Maybe pull in some brown as well, more white. Right back in. And begin to kind of just now have some variation in our cloud color. And let it kind of mix in with the more bluish color that we had as well. letting it blend while it's still wet. I'm trying to really rapidly fill in. Oops, too close in with my stick. Just trying to soften them as I go along. And again, trying to also be very deliberate as I kind of create this under layer here. I kind of want to make a softer transition between the sky color and the cloud cover. And really letting it have some letting the sky itself have some texture. As I go through, I'm also trying to think about how I'm going to let myself deviate from the plan. So like the more important thing for me to do here is to really learn about how to create different shapes and forms. And I'm really not very focused or worried about um, sticking to the plan or creating something that is an exact image of what's in my mind. Um, I really just want to make sure that I am taking the time to kind of focus on my technique, focus on what I'm doing, and trying to execute to the best of my ability the forms on the image that I want to create. Again, loading my brush back up. Now it's cleaned and back in with some more blue in this area. And letting that kind of come over and mix in with the layers below. And pulling up to create that kind of like more fluffy feel. Try to be mindful of where the sky and the clouds meet to create a much softer transition area, while trying to let some of the more darker tones that we established come through as I paint, and letting some areas of texture kind of come through. I'm already beginning to feel my brush begin to stick, which means the acrylic paints begin to get tacky and dry, which is good. I did a good job in this area here, having some kind of bright spots, and I want to kind of get back to that a little bit. So I'm going to try to do let's add in a little more water, I think, maybe, and pull on some more white, maybe a little bit of brown and a little bit of blue, but still letting the paint be very light in color. And I'm just going to try to, yeah, just like that. Kind of really lightly work back through. Really lightly let our clouds take shape. Cool. Gonna clean my brush again a little bit. Back into that same area of the palette that I was just in. There is a little bird, a little woodpecker trying to eat my door right now. He is just kind of hanging out. I wish I could take a picture of him and show him to you guys. He's just kind of flying around by my door, kind of right back in. So if you heard a little tapping sound on the audio, that was a little bird visiting my little studio here, in my dining room. And he was just kind of trying to check on things, I guess. Maybe he wanted to watch the stream too. I'm just trying to slowly work over in the left-hand direction here and slowly add and layer on more paint into these areas to kind of give our cloud shape some more feel in this area. And as I do that and progressively add more paint, it'll begin to feel more, begin to feel a bit closer. Cool. And I'm cleaning again. And basically what I'm meaning is I'm going to kind of keep trying to develop these different little ridges in the cloud shape, progressively move them further to the right while layering on more paint. Really fast, I think I also want to try to add some more paint in this area to kind of give us a bright spot there above our clouds. Just like that. There we go. Cool. That was a nice, beautiful sky blue I just made. I think I like that so much that I'm going to try to do it again. And I am going to play the game of no whammy, no whammy, no whammy. So what I want to do now is very carefully take that same color and try to work it underneath our clouds. By having this shift in focus, I'm also giving some time for the cloud areas that we just painted to dry. Just trying to even this color out some and blend it into the darker areas I have below. And let this have some little bit of texture to it. Because in the image I'm looking at, the area here is pretty blue, but the area here is pretty blue, but the area under here is pretty hazy. So I'll likely add a different color below here. Maybe I'll try to use the phthalo green and some red to make a purple color, and I'll add that in here in a little bit. So now I'm drying my brush a bit, and what I'm going to do is try to come back in with our whiter color and work on the clouds a little more. Really loading paint on the brush, and I'm coming through, backing my hand up a little bit. And just moving this from right to left. Left to right. Cool. Now, I think what I want to do also is come in and make some more of our more grayish tone with more of this raw umber and white with a touch of blue And this is the color I have on the palette here, or on the brush. Spread that out a little bit, see how it looks. It's a bit too blue, so we're gonna add in some more brown. I'm also going to clean my brush some to get off some of that blue that I have on there. Pulling it down into this grayer tone that I have. And this is much more what I was looking for. I'm going to start here. Yeah, this is much more blue than I wanted. That's okay, because it's going to form an undertone. I'll probably let it dry for a little while, and then I'll be able to add on a layer of paint on top of it, because it is actually kind of creating an effect that I want. It's just a little bit too much of a blue shade. Sorry for elbowing the camera there. And kind of letting it blend in with our whiter shade that's kind of next to it. And I'm trying to think about how I want to achieve this grayish tone that I want. And I think I really have to be much more in the white and the brown. I've added some more water to my palette to really kind of try to create the color that I want. And I'm going to again spread it out with my brush as I've created it, and then load it up onto the front of the brush. Now let's try that again. Because they're both kind of wet still, I'm able to blend them together and create a color that I want. I'm also getting the kind of the color that I want for the sky beneath it as well. So I may also add in some touches here. Again, this is kind of hazier underneath. And together they're kind of giving me the color that I want. Looking back up at the image now, I kind of want to also take some of that color, maybe with a little more blue mixed in, and come into this area and just take this like so. Kind of similar. I want to just begin to take away some of the more clearly defined areas here and really let the clouds develop a little more. Come with a drier brush and just kind of fluff this area out some and soften it. Again, same down here. Really trying to soften the paint on the canvas and kind of let it blend with the colors below it a little bit. Okay, what I'm also doing there is removing some paint. So I need to be very careful as to how often I do that so that I don't overwork it and remove more paint than I intended to, which I kind of did here. You're seeing the orange come through a little more. So let's take our white again, pull it down into a wetter area and rework this area. And let's see if we can't create some clouds that have some depth to them. I want to just take this as well and kind of just keep working along the bottom here. Keep drawing that out. Keep adding on paint to the hazier area so until it has the right kind of value to it. Pardon me. And again, I'm just going to keep working in layers from left to right. Then blending in the opposite direction. And really letting the clouds take shape while also continuing to make sure that their edge on the bottom remains a little bit flat. And as I do this, I'm being mindful to also add on paint to the lower sky area so that has that added little depth to it. So it has that more hazy feel, and so that its tone matches the clouds above it. Back into the raw umber and titanium white, and a little bit of phthalo blue in the mix. Probably a little bit too much blue, that's okay. Pulling in more white and umber into our mix. Keeping that same area of my palette very wet. And now kind of coming through. Oh, snowplow's coming through. Sorry if you're hearing that. And now I'm kind of moving in the opposite direction from right to left. I'm just trying to blend. Cool. Cleaning my brush. And I'm going to repeat this a couple more times. Because already I think I have some cool things going on. Number one, I have this cloud shape here, which is kind of being pushed back by this hazy gap here with these clouds. At the same time, I also have this little shape here, which is forming a ridge of cloud in front of that one. I kind of want to keep repeating that as I move in this direction to really form that. I think the next one I'm going to have is going to be moving like this, filling in that area. So let's do that. Again, some white and some brown. And I'm just going to start right about here. And just come just like that. Soften that a little bit while it's still wet. Oop. Backing my hand up a little bit. Just letting the clouds be nice and soft. While still having a decent amount of texture to them. And coming back in to give our hazy sky that nice hazy feel. Make sure I'm not removing paint, making sure I'm being very gentle and very distant with the brush, while still giving the right appeal that I want. More brown, or more umber, more thinning white. Only a little bit of blue from the corner. Back in. Now this time what I'm going to do is grab some a little more bluish white. Really mix this quite heavily. And right back into this area. And what we're trying to do here is create the under image of a cloud. And then I'm going to kind of try to go back in with more pure white along the crest of it and add in that more defined top of the cloud shape. My brush is clean now. There's no paint on it. What I'm trying to do is kind of soften and blend this a little bit. I try to not do this very often. I try to make sure that I blend with wet paint, but sometimes it is nice to soften with a brush that's clean. Cool. So wetting it again. Back into my titanium white. Pulling it into the wetter part of my palette. And I'm just going to try to follow right along here. And let this kind of become in front of our higher level clouds here. Just kind of following along this area and letting the paint define where it wants the clouds to be. Just like so. And really letting it be pulled down a little bit and soften as I work in these layers. Back into that same or similar color. really loading the paint on the brush and kind of coming in here and just again working our way through, letting the clouds be clouds, letting them have fun, and really trying to not be very mindful as to where they are, where they live, just trying to let them make their own choices and decisions, their own little world. Clouds are very ephemeral, and I, as a painter and as a person, am very specific in the strokes that I make. So I'm trying to be a little bit looser with that and let them be as they are, because they're clouds. Clouds are not something that have clearly defined edges or things, which is always a struggle for me in traditional paint. Um, in digital world, I always found that it was different. I could always make it clouds much more easily. But with real paint, I'm really trying to hammer in and focus on how I can make them in a way that is pleasing to me and like still very easy. In digital painting, it's much easier to blend because digital paint doesn't dry, and you can pick and choose when it's dry and wet by locking layers. In real paint, once the paint's dry, the paint's dry. So you're kind of SOL. Just gonna keep going through here and keep working on these clouds, pulling in more white and more umber as I need, letting them mix with water, listening to the snowplow come through. And really trying to just work through and make these very soft cloud shapes. And there goes snowplow. Again, trying to make these very light and very nice and even. And I'm gonna come back to more very white work from here again. I'm noticing that the underpainting is shining through a bit too much there, creating a bit too much of a dark tone where you can kind of see a bit too much of the orange. So I'm going to try to soften that some, and by adding a little more paint, and by trying to create um, the feel that I want overall. Same thing, more white. Right back in. Same area. Let's just try to soften it a bit. I may have to do that after it dries a bit. Pulling down into our more sky area, letting this have its hazy feel we want. I'm really letting the acrylic paint spread and mix with the layers underneath to create a much more defined texture. And letting it have some imperfection, which will match much more closely with what the eye should be seeing. I'm going to leave that spot alone for a little bit, let it dry some, and I'll come back to it. I think I need a little more water in our palette as well, so I've added some more on my brush. And I'm just pulling some more paint through that wet spot, some titanium white, some raw umber. Loading the brush on quite heavily. And come over here and begin to work in this direction. And kind of follow along this shape here. Maybe I will come back into there just a little bit. Really pull these down a little bit. I'm going to pull some more paint into that water, which is basically going to be most of my titanium white that's left. Just smash it into that white area. And make sure that I'm really mixing more paint in there so that it is much heavier than it was in that last application. And right back into that. Again, looking a little bit heavier now. And letting it form some more cloud shapes. And the brush move in a kind of circular motion. And letting it form that kind of haziness beneath it. Some more umber. Same spot. And then I kind of want to have a little more blue here, so I'll mix in some phthalo blue into that same area, as well as umber. And I'm going to start here and work that color across. And then work it up a little bit as well. Just so there's a little more blue in our sky. Another thing that I kind of has been a big difference and big change for me between digital art and real world art is that there really isn't any kind of, there's no way to undo. And it really requires me to be much more okay with painting over things and much more okay with applying a lot of paint. And I'm really kind of letting things develop over time. Whereas as a digital artist, it's much more about um, you have much more freedom to kind of go through and undo things you've created previously, and really a lot more freedom to um, be uncomfortable with your mistakes. Mistakes is a bad word. Be uncomfortable with the choices that are happening as your painting is occurring. And that kind of takes away from the artwork itself because the painting becomes too perfect. And you want imperfection in your artwork because that is what will give it complexity and character. And that's what gives it its appeal as a work of art rather than as a more mechanical creation of a um, photo replication or a other more technical aspect of it, like a CGI from a movie, which is still artwork, but it's very different from a, let's say, um, something that would have been created by uh, crap. What's the name of the guy that Star Wars? I forget his name. Basically, something like that where you have a pre-production concept drawing, which is art, versus the CGI creations in the final cut, which is more of a exacting in scientific creation, if that makes any sense. And what I'm trying to do now is just add in more paint, and I'm getting, again, as I'm going through, the clouds are getting more and more defined and detailed, and they're getting a little more robust in their color, and they're kind of, it's creating that, they're creating a much more layered effect. And I'm kind of letting the different layers of paint dry as I work on different areas. It's really creating, again, so we started where we had, I mentioned a couple minutes ago, where we had, we had one, two, and three. I think now I have one, two, three, four, five, maybe even a sixth over here. And I'm starting to see the layered effect that I want in these clouds, because we have different areas of light that are standing out. I'm going to pour out some more titanium white onto my palette. Titanium white is definitely the color that I go through the most. So I highly recommend having a giant one like this, because it really is helpful to have that much. This is the big 200 milliliter one. Back into my white, moving it into our wet area, loading the brush, and let's try to add some more definition to this area here to help it stand out and help it create a hazed effect with our other areas. Like that, yeah. Now I'm pulling down a little bit from that white. That's kind of filling in the area a little more. And this is kind of creating a much more alive image than what I had a moment ago. And now much less of that orange underpainting is showing through. Being very gentle now as I kind of move into the hazier area, trying to let this have its flat underside as it's, giving that little gap between the clouds and the horizon. Again, letting that blend out some. I think it really have its day. That different tone is also really pushing the upper corner much further back too. Um, I feel like it's a bit disharmonious, but it really is pushing this area much further back into the painting. This area to me seems much closer than this. Grabbing more white, a little bit of brown, and following along that same theme, letting these areas kind of mingle and hang out a bit together, get to know each other a little bit. And it really is like getting to know a new friend, because you really are letting these two areas blend and letting the layers stack. And as the layers stack, they are creating depth, and they're creating little bits of texture. Really just letting this hang out, move down to the painting, let it have a lot more life to it. I am going to take some more white, try to find a drier part of my paper towel, pull the brush through it, run through my fingers a little bit as well, kind of like that. And now I'm going to grab some white, just a little bit this time, well, a little bit, it's a lot. And I want to try to work in this area here very gently. Then I'm going to shift into this area here. Being very light and gentle with my strokes. and letting the white kind of blend through and develop a little bit. And pulling on the bottom a little bit to kind of flatten it out. And then wiping it into our hazy sky below. Now that I have less paint on the brush, I'm going to come back here and kind of let that blend in a little bit. Really let it kind of create again a little bit of a lighter hazy area for the eye to linger on a little bit. And to really create that impression of movement from left to right. This is an image of that's taken from the top of Franconia Ridge in New Hampshire. It is an area that has very fast moving clouds because there's nothing in the area that can stop the wind. These are really some of the highest points in the Northeast. So the cloud cover really moves very rapidly in this case, from the Northwest toward the Southeast. So I'm really moving very heavily in that kind of direction, very rapidly. The weather is known there for changing very rapidly, very quickly. As I'm talking and kind of shooting my mouth off a little bit, I'm letting the paint dry. I can kind of visually see it getting tackier. As I do that, I am preparing myself for what I want to do next. Basically, taking a little deep breath, and then I'm coming right back in here. I'm trying to apply more white, drifting up a little higher maybe, and letting this continue to form complex clouds and continuing to layer in more and more paint into this layer. And layer in paint into the layer. That's good. Move my hand back on my stick a little bit. Trying to find a drier part of the paper towel. It's okay if it's not totally dry. I want the brush to be a little wet. Just not super wet. I don't want to see drops of moisture on the brush. I want it to be a little bit moist. Sorry if any of you watching don't like that word. Gently working through, adding on more paint here. I think what I might need there in that little area is more phthalo blue. So I may add another layer of phthalo blue there to create something bluer for our white to grab onto. Because right now it's kind of just grabbing onto the base burnt umber layer below. So I'm going to grab a lot of our different colors here and really mix around some of our raw umber, phthalo blue, and titanium white till I get a much grayer color. I have a lot of it on the brush, so I'm kind of going to spread it out. What I'm also doing here is seeing how it looks on the palette itself, and it has a kind of really like greenish bluish color right now. So that's kind of what I want. I'm just going to fill this in like this. I'm going to work this kind of in this direction here and create an underpainting, kind of like a secondary underpainting for us to work off of. This paint was definitely not nearly as wet as some of my other paint was, so I'm going to take a damp clean brush, bring it back through that same color, and work it back through. Right underneath, and really trying to add more water to this part of the painting as well, to let it spread a little more evenly and freely. And what I'm probably going to have to do is add on some more titanium white as I add on more layers to our cloud layer, which will then kind of reinforce and get us back to the value that we had previously. Back in, cleaning my brush, white, kind of into that same color, working through now. And then, yep, just like that. Just like that. A little bit careful near the bottom of the clouds, but then a little bit more aggressive as I work my way down. Really letting this get pulled through and down. And then I'll be adding on some more white here in a minute. Maybe with some more umber mixed in as well. Tiny touch of blue. Too much blue, more umber, more white. Again, just trying to build up layers in these clouds to help them really take shape and form. And then trying to spread these colors across the sky to really let it have a look of complexity to it. Trying to not be as even as I have been as well when I do that. I really want there to be a mixture of color in the sky. Okay, I just put a lot more water on my palette by accident. That's okay, that's a good thing. That'll give us some colors that'll be able to run a little more. Mixing some of our three colors together here. Again, raw umber, titanium white, and phthalo blue. Trying to just add a little more harmony to this part of the painting based on what's going on below. Trying to not touch the edge of the clouds at all. Now trying to, again, go back into our white. Let it really mix into the water some. Right now it's kind of getting bubbly with some of the more grayish color that we have. I'm just going to keep pulling in more white until I have the color. Oops, sorry for elbowing the camera. Yeah, color white that I'm looking for. Pulling it out on the canvas to kind of see what it looks like. It's not white enough yet. There. Removing some excess paint. Pulling back on the stick a little bit. Letting this kind of do its thing. Pulling it down, letting it blend a little bit, creating that kind of flat edge. Letting it blend with our sky. Whoops, too much white. Back into our more greenish bluish color. And just continually working this in. And as my brush gets drier and drier, has less paint on it, I will come back in here, just harmonize it a little bit. I don't quite want it to stand out quite so much. Okay. Some more white on the brush. Not a lot this time. Just working that in, pulling it down a little bit. And softening that bottom edge just a little bit. And trying to make sure that I'm only staying right in that cloud area. Just like that. Cleaning off my brush again. Tapping it dry. Pulling into my titanium white. And then here we go. Just like that. Cool. Now, what I want to do next is think about the shades that I want for. Well, first, I think I want to add in just a little more clouds. Um, in the reference image, there's a darker spot roughly here, so I'm going to try to recreate that a little bit. I'm also not trying to create a one-to-one representation of my reference image. What I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm capturing the light correctly, or at least capturing the shading a little more correctly. So let's add it in some darkness right around here. Again, darkness here is really being represented by including more umber and more blue. And let's kind of move this like this. Move that down further into the painting. Cool. Now, that is going to have to dry a little bit before I apply my next layer of white to it. While it does that, what I want to think about is what colors do I want to use to start my ridge? What I want, I think, is phthalo green. And phthalo green is going to be another color that will act as our surrogate for black. Yeah, for black. Paint my fingers there, so I'm going to clean my fingers off. And again, I need to add a little more water to my brush. My water is also quite dirty at this point, so I need to kind of be mindful of that as well. I'm going to pull that green into the umber, into the white. And really mix this until I have a soft greenish gray. Spraying it on my canvas, see what I have. I think it's too dark still, so I'm adding in some more white, maybe even some more blue. There we go. Cool. Now, right along here, what I'm just going to begin doing is trying to remember where we had that ridge line. Just going to kind of go in nice and softly and imagine where we had the ridge line when we were here before. I think kind of just like that. Then as I do this, I'm just going to kind of pull this down and try to find different shapes, different contours that will exist in our little mountain range that's off in the distance here. Pull some more umber in, some more phthalo green, some of our kind of like greenish gray cloud color. And right back in. And kind of just pulling this down as I go. And really trying to, if you recall, I had this kind of like shaded area on the side here. Kind of trying to pull that through and really let that hang out. And I really want to try to create that kind of little variation in texture to create our image of shadow. And that's a really important thing here where I want to have different areas of light and shadow. I don't really want to have this have any kind of specific texture to it. I don't really want you to be able to see specific details on these ridges. I just kind of want you to be able to imagine and really let the eye kind of try to figure out and, really contemplate and think about what these landforms are and what they are, because they're really, really very far off in the distance. I'm sorry, like a couple miles away. So I want these to have less of a defined form. And I don't really want to be thinking about contour quite yet. Pulling in more umber, more brown. Sorry, umber is the brown, more green, phthalo green. Just now until I get a color I want. Testing it on the palette. I think it is what I want. Kind of back in. And trying to just gently introduce some different tones, different values to the painting to create that sense of shadow. Really letting this pull down. And form different areas of light and dark. Shadow and more dull, less white. Bright areas are more bright and have more white. And the amount of the titanium white that I use will really define which areas are getting light and which areas are not. So already I have this shape here where we can kind of see that this part of the ridge is catching a little more light than this area. And now what I want to do is add in some more titanium white to that same color area. And then start from here. This is maybe a bit too green. So I think I'm actually going to pull this more into the sky. And then I think pull in the opposite direction to kind of soften it out some. And then come back into our gray. Get rid of some excess paint. And kind of work our clouds and sky back in a little bit. Now see there, I obviously made a little bit of a mistake there, but it was okay. And now I add by making that mistake, I added a little bit of phthalo green into our sky, and that's actually created, I think, some really cool effects because now we have these areas here along the ridge where there's almost an indication of a little bit of a purplish hue when I didn't even really apply any color that even looks like that. So now I want more green, more umber, and a touch of white. Testing on my canvas, a bit too dark still, some more white. Testing on my palette again, there we go. Now we're going to recreate that area of light a little bit, and I'm going to pull down from here, like so. And what I'm going to do is kind of try to follow along this ridge and create areas where I want there to be more light and try to softly blend into areas where I want there to be more shadow. and just kind of being very soft with it and being very mindful that I have already kind of established my ridge line, and I'm just kind of lightly trying to pull different areas in and down as I create some complexity here. Now I'm cleaning my brush. I'm gonna grab some more of that same color, that same area of the palette. Not a lot of it, just a little bit. And kind of try to continue to work in these areas where I think there's going to be catching a little more light and letting them have their moment in the sun, so to speak. And kind of pulling them down and letting them blend softly with the areas that I think are going to be a little bit darker. Now I can also see that my cloud has now dried a bit. So what I'm going to do is kind of go back to where I was, take some titanium white, mix into our grayish color, and come back in here. I can see that? See, I had to stop myself there because look at that glob of paint on there. Let's get rid of that, put that back where it belongs, and pull out the brush in a clean part of the canvas until I have a much flatter part of the brush there. And we'll create our final little cloud shape here. Just like that. Using this more gray colors on my brush here to create and kind of move some less of that green that we had a moment ago, and letting this kind of add some whimsy, maybe up here a little bit too, to kind of let some green into this part of it as well. And just softening this up some. Kind of making it not quite clear as to where the clouds end and the sky begins. Letting this be kind of like a little bit of a fluffiness. Just like that. Very cool. And back down here a little bit. And just trying to create some variation in texture and layer as I apply more paint to the areas that are dry. Cool. Now, we'll let that dry some more, then we'll see how it looks. And we may add some more back in there in a moment. And now I'm going to go back into where I was and think more about where we want our greens to be. So I'm going to make some more green, some more umber, some white, letting that get all happy together. More green, a little more umber. Now let's just try to think about where we want some darker areas to be. This is quite dark. And we're just going to kind of work this through. Let it pull down further in. Letting it blend with what's below. And really letting this add up layers of paint on the canvas, and really letting this add texture and complexity to our ridge line. And it's very important that we establish these shaded areas. So as I go back through and add more white and add lighter color, it'll create that contrast, that layer, that texture that we want. So now I'm going to try to grab something that's kind of in the middle. Perfect. I'm going to come right in here and really begin to try to work downward now to blend those out. Come back over here with it, some more of it. Oh, I don't have enough of it. Interesting too that it's not that it appears differently in different parts of the painting now as well, because it's really it looks different compared to other shades really. If we keep working though, it should eventually come through a bit. Yeah. And down a bit. Blending it through. Really letting it blend and get to know itself a little bit. And very similar to the clouds, I'm just going to keep repeating this over and over a couple times to really create layers and to really create the light and dark areas of the painting and really be mindful of where those areas will be. I do need some more raw umber, so we're going to grab some of that. Back into my paint. Mixing that into a wetter area. Taking in some more of our grayish color from our clouds. Testing it on the canvas. Nice, it's a very light shade, so we'll start here. Work our way into here and then begin to pull this down. Then we'll make a decision that we also want some over here. Pull that down as well. Work this in, blend it a little more. Getting rid of some of the excess paint. And then, oh, my brush is kind of dry, so I'm going to let it get a little bit wetter. Some more phthalo green and umber. Testing it out. It's a bit darker, but I want a little bit being a little bit darker than that. There we go. Cool. Back into our shaded areas. I kind of want to have be right about here, really. Ooh, this is really kind of what I wanted. This is a much darker shade. And getting more of that umber as well. Pulling this down. What I was doing there was making sure that my ridges still felt like mountains and kind of letting them have a little bit of a defined edge to them, which they would, which they do have in the reference image. Even though they're very distant, they still feel um, very clearly defined. Adding it in and pulling it down, making sure I'm getting a lot of the paint out of the brush. Now with a dry brush, I'm going to kind of try to take this line here, this edge, and soften it and let it blend a little more between the two different areas. While staying very clear of the top of our ridges. Back into a bit of a darker shade with a good mixture of brown and green. Testing it on canvas, nice. On palette. And starting lower and working our way down. What I'm doing here is trying to establish that things that are more different are lighter in value than things that are closer in. I do want that to kind of creep up into this area a little bit, but not too much. I still want this to feel like it is more distant and kind of blending in so that we can't quite tell quite how far away it is. Crawling up into this area here and pulling down. Some more umber, more white. I'm gonna come back into this area. Try to really lighten it. It really is amazing how much time flies when I'm doing this because I didn't even realize that 2 hours had already passed. What I'm also trying to do here is create some subtle little differences so that we have almost an illusion. Like even here, I can almost kind of see like there's a much more distant ridge even behind this one that's much further away than the ones we're seeing here. And that's really the gist of what I'm trying to create here, of this just indications of things that are very distant without having to spend time putting in the detail of where they are. And really just letting the different colors, different values mix together to form different areas of the painting and to form different particular areas and spots. And as I try to avoid reworking certain areas, we're getting that look of layering and depth of field that I want in the painting. So here, we kind of have this very textured area. So we have a ridge here, 1, 2, probably 3, 4, 5, and 6. And as I work this one could become a little bit closer, so that I think the one that's closest to us is probably right here, because this is the one where we're seeing the most detail. So I kind of want that one to kind of stay and stand out. So what I'm going to do is take some more, well, first I'm clean my brush, and then what I'm going to do is take some more of our darker shade and kind of work through this area here in a minute. So phthalo green, burnt umber, and let's, well, there's a giant glob of it, so let's test how it'll look. It is definitely the color that I want. And kind of working through this area here and letting this get pulled down. And then trying to follow along that shaded area a little more and kind of pulling down. And let me try to stay clear of that area quite a bit, while still just gently pulling this down and blending it out. Softening these lines a little bit, being mindful of where we are here, trying to not override some of the things that we've already done, trying to just pull down and through. And trying to make sure that I'm using the full length of the brush as well, meaning the actual placing my hand much further back on the stick. I paid full price, I might as well use the full length of the brush. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush, let it be a little bit moist. As I clean it, I'm seeing it's not actually really clean. And you can kind of see it here. It still has some kind of greenish color to it. I'm just going to kind of take this brush and lighten and soften some of these lines here. Working my way down so that I'm always working from light to dark as I blend. I do not want to work from dark to light. and just cleaning it, pulling excess paint down, and then I'm beginning to think about where I want other forms to be. Now, I think I want there to be some other shape here where there is a ridge that's maybe a little bit closer to the one that we've already created. So I think right about here or so, I'm going to try to add in some different shapes. Notice how I'm also changing the direction of my brush to also let the texture create that line that you're seeing there. So it's remaining in shadow, but we're not really able to, but we're seeing that, but our eye is able to see it as something that's different than the image that's behind it. So let me kind of also try to make it a little more irregular as well. And really just kind of letting this different shape of a different ridge have a little bit of value, a little bit of form to it as I pull it down. Cool. Now, I want to begin thinking about what's next in our foreground. And what's next is a kind of hump. And that hump runs from a little bit below here. So like roughly the halfway point in the canvas. To the point I'm actually going to even take this, I'm going to make a mark right there, mostly on our tape, and that's where it's going to begin. And I want it to end right about here. So I'm going to take some more. Again, we're using our raw umber as our black, so I want to have a lot of raw umber. And right about here to here, I want to have something like that. Just like that. Also changing my direction here quite a lot to make sure that I'm giving this new ridge some texture. Most of this will not be seen except for this corner here and this shape here. And then this point will form the starting point for our move toward the bottom corner here with our foreground. So I want to begin painting this in as if I wasn't going to establish that foreground, because that way I don't have to worry about having gaps or missing different parts of the painting. I'm kind of already being present and aware of the object that exists in the background there. Again, just trying to pull this down. Like so. And then nice and straight down like that. By doing this section first and then finishing here, I'm also creating that lighter value on that particular side of the ridge that has a bit of a bright spot. As I'm looking at it again, though, it's actually kind of dark, so I'm going to take some more of my umber, some of my phthalo green, mix that in a little bit with a little bit of white. And this time I'll start on this side and I'll just pull this area down like that. I think I want a little more umber on that. I may also need to have this dry a little before I keep working it more. So what I'll do instead is come back to my far side and just kind of work in some more paint onto this side. Trying to also think about where that ridge is going, and I'm trying to give myself little marks to work off of. Maybe what I'll use, yeah, let's have a little bit of fun. Let's go back. So what I just did was I grabbed some burnt sienna. Let's add in some burnt sienna to let that catch a little bit of light and let that form that kind of shape that we're looking for here. I think I'm going to add something similar to the far side as well. And this burnt sienna is much more wet, so it should be able to really stick to the heavier umber, which is less wet. Just create some subtle variation there. And now I'm going to go back into my umber, and I'm going to begin to sketch in with my brush where our foreground will be. And I want to use a ton of paint here. This is really going to be something that is really the subject of the painting. And now what I'm beginning to kind of do is kind of create this kind of like T-shaped ridge. That's kind of like this. So there's a kind of like an area at here, an area at here, and areas are basically very steep valleys that are formed by glaciers. In addition to being a painting nerd, I'm also a geology nerd, which is why some of my paintings are very inspired by um, points of geology. Now notice how we have used value to set back the different parts of our painting. So now we have, I think, several distinct areas that are all sitting back in front of each other, really creating good depth of field. More umber and back in, and really using the umber to form a the effect of the falling ridge line, and really letting it also define the sharp edge here between the peak, the ridge, and the valley. It's probably hard to see because of how dark the colors are. And eventually, what I'm going to do after this dries is glaze this with some additional color to let this pop a little more beyond the green that we're seeing here. Some more phthalo green, more of our cloud white color. Letting that mix a little bit and letting that form this little under area here. Cool. I think I'm going to call this a break for now, and I want to let this painting dry, and I'm going to come back in and add additional layers that are more light and liquid and glazed. So I will leave you guys there. Thank you for watching those that did, and I hope you have a good